In my almost 17 years living abroad, there have been a number of moves that I have made, and in those moves, I have learned a thing or two about what not to waste your money on and what to maybe waste your money on. And in this episode, I want to focus on maybe some of the things not to waste your money on that might not be worth it. But anyway, let's get this episode started. I'm Rafael Di Furia, back at it again for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter, and roll that intro. Just getting straight into things, taking your stuff. Point number one, that can be one of the most expensive things that you will find during your move. Doesn't matter whether you're moving across state, across city, across wherever. If you have things that you need to buy to fill your apartment or things that you are taking with you to fill your apartment or standalone home, whatever it might be, that will be a major expense. Unless you're buying a home, then that's a real major expense. Of course, there are different ways to look at this. Are you taking a few things with you? Are you going to leave things in storage? Are you going to take everything with you? One of the biggest things that many people want to do is to be able to recreate their home, but in another country. I don't blame them, but I mean, if you think about it, and you're coming from the US at least, big American furniture doesn't necessarily always fit so great into small European apartments and homes. Not that you can't, but just you want to make sure if you're bringing your lazy boy with you that you'll actually have space for it. If you're going to be moving big, bulky things, or even if you're going to be bringing a car with you, you'll have to be thinking about how you're going to get it to the other side of the world potentially. And one of those ways is by actually using a shipping company that will actually send your things by a ship. Not just boxes that you're sending through the post office, but actually a shipping company with the big boats and everything. If you do your own container, yes, you'll be able to take a lot with you, but you'll also have a lot of things that you have to take into account, like, for example, import taxation, potentially. Maybe some countries that you're moving to will allow you to take a container of things tax-free. It depends on where you're trying to move. But you could be looking at thousands upon thousands of dollars or euros, pounds, whatever the currency may be. One way, though, that you can potentially save some money in this case is if you are using an agent who will be able to combine shipments and divide shipping containers so that maybe if you only need a partial container, that you'll be able to get your stuff in there and they'll be able to organize everything. Maybe it could take a little bit longer and maybe it'll have to go through a different port than where you're coming in, and maybe it'll have to come through a different port than the country you're going to be moving to and get transported across Europe by truck. It all depends. There are various factors that can go into it. But of course, the more that you can let go of, the more that you can potentially save. I mean, if you are going to be bringing some things with you, potentially even by plane, one thing to take into consideration is that in some cases, depending on how far you'll be traveling, extra luggage can cost less than sending a shipment or sending a box or whatever it might be. But of course, if you're checking in luggage, there's always the associated risk there. But if you're going to be sending a package, then there's also still an associated risk there as well. But moving on to the next point, in my years abroad, I've had some moves that I've made happen very quickly, some even in less than a month. I think I've actually even done one or two in about a week or two. Wouldn't recommend it at all. So it's not that you can't make an international move happen very quickly, but I would highly recommend against it. One of the reasons is because if you have a whole life that you need to wrap up because you're moving to another place, whatever it may be, maybe you're going to be in a certain situation where you do have that ability that you don't have much going on in your life. You can pick up, pack up, and go. But if you have things that you need to wrap up, then it's worthwhile taking the time to really do things properly. But regardless, one of the areas where I do see a lot of people wasting time is not planning far enough ahead and not getting enough planned during that time. Even for something as simple as airplane tickets. If you know you're going to be moving ahead of time, say in 6 months or however long, buying those tickets ahead of time might not be the worst idea. Usually, if you buy them a certain amount ahead of time, that you can save quite a bit rather than buying them last minute. I've bought last minute tickets for a last minute international move, and I made it work. It wasn't cheap, but I made it work. There are those times where maybe you can get lucky and you would be able to find a last minute ticket for very cheap, but those are few and far between, at least in my experience when traveling. Usually, if you plan things out ahead of time, you can really set yourself up even for very, very cheap tickets, even if you're going intercontinentally, not just internationally. Because also, if you are going to be moving internationally, I mean, how are you going to bring your stuff? I mean, I know we've been talking a little bit about bringing your stuff so far, so I'm just going to connect this to the last idea we spoke about. And if you are needing to send yourself a box, what's the address that you're sending it to? If you're not giving yourself a lot of time ahead, then Do you know how reliable getting deliveries will be in your new place? I mean, even for example, do you need to have your name on the door? There are certain things that you might have to have organized ahead of time or even know about ahead of time. Or are there potential drop-off points where your package can be brought to? This is one of the reasons why I personally prefer to bring luggage if I can. If I need something like immediately, or if I'm bringing only a limited amount of items with me, then luggage is my preferred way of bringing things with me. But of course, that can end up leading to more cost for transportation to and from an airport. If you need to pay for private transport and you're bringing 4 suitcases or 3 suitcases and they're all really big and heavy, you're going to pay for it. You're going to pay for it in every which way. Physically, mentally, emotionally, and financially. Physically, because you're actually going to have to deal with picking them up. Mentally and emotionally, because you're going to be thinking about them probably during your flight and making sure how are you going to get them from A to B, and then also getting them off the carousel once you get to your next airport. And financially, for obvious reasons. Not giving yourself enough time ahead leads to another problem that I've seen, and that has to do with not having a place organized for you to be able to live. Is it possible to move to another country and potentially not have a place lined up where you're actually going to be living? Depending on your legal status in that country, that could potentially be an option for you. But for many people who are looking at visas to be able to make their life in another country, they will have to have that organized ahead of time, and they may have to have the rental contract there with them presented during the visa application process. And say, for example, you end up in a country where there's maybe a difficulty in the system with where you can kind of insert yourself into the process, because maybe you need an apartment, but to get an apartment, you need to have a work contract. But to have a work contract, you need to have residency. But to have residency, you need to have the apartment. And to have the apartment is the only way that you can get the residency. And so where do you kind of insert yourself into this closed loop system? I've spoken about this a lot with Italy, but Italy is not the only country where this exists. So if you're having to bounce around from Airbnb to Airbnb, I mean, you're going to be spending significantly more potentially than what it might cost you if you're renting just a normal average apartment rental. But getting to my next point, which is actually touching back on a point that I've kind of spoken about, is the visa process, or making sure that you're legal in the country. What I've seen a lot of people do, including myself, is not being properly educated on what needs to be done and how it needs to be done. I mean, this is a problem I made years ago that I got over very quickly. But even I think it's very important, if you are going to be working with a professional during your process of relocating abroad or getting citizenship abroad, even if it's a process that any lawyer potentially could help you with, it's worthwhile having somebody on your side who specifically specializes in what you're doing. I've had the experience in the past where maybe I relied on a lawyer or a service provider that was very headstrong and very sure of what they were doing, even though they had never done it before, because it's an easy process. Of course, anybody can do this. Any lawyer can help you with that. But then, because of their lack of understanding about certain aspects of the process, it ended up leading to nowhere, or incorrectly getting paperwork done, or requesting the wrong documents, whatever it might have been. This is not something that I've just been through. I've seen other people go through this quite often. And so really having somebody on your side who knows what they are doing and has done it before can make a really big difference at the end of the day. There are many things that can seem simple from the outside, but if you don't know what the process is, and you don't have somebody on your side who knows what that process is as well, it's the blind basically leading the blind. I mean, I remember even at one point when I was getting my Italian citizenship, I ended up doing it all on my own. There was a point where I started looking at having an Italian attorney help me, but the attorney had no clue, and I had to explain how to do certain things, and I had no legal training. And even then, I thought it was absurd as well. Ended up not working with him, not finishing the process with him, finished the process on my own. But being educated on how all of these things work and not just jumping headfirst straight in can save you a lot of time, headaches, and of course, money. You don't want to have to get the same document legalized multiple times, or, for example, if you are needing documents from your home country, it's usually the best idea to get them while you're there. If you're trying to get a document from your home country and have it sent to the other side of the world, especially if you're from someplace like the US, you're going to spend a lot of money very quickly for documents that might not have cost you much at all. Moving on to the next topic though, internet and phone. This one for me is something that's very important because I work mostly remotely, and having a good internet connection and a good phone connection are extremely, extremely important. But I have had situations where maybe I'm in a place temporarily, or I don't know if I'm going to want to have one type of contract or another type of contract. And by not signing a contract, maybe I've gone for services that ended up costing more and wasted money in the end. But then I've been on the other side of things where maybe by signing a contract, hoping to save some money, it actually ended up costing me more money in the end. Like, for example, during my move from Italy to Portugal, I had maybe a year before that moved into a new apartment, and instead of having my internet line transferred from one apartment to another apartment, the person at the internet store who was helping me, in air quotes, helping, said that it would be better and I could get a better deal if I signed a new contract. Of course, I'm thinking, well, why not? Of course, I'll sign a contract. That's not a problem. I'll be saving enough money that it makes sense that I'm going to be living here. At least that's what I thought at the time. And then I ended up getting into the situation where I left before the full contract term, and I knew I was going to have to pay either a penalty or some sort of lump sum to potentially finish out the contract. Actually, what happened in the end, the company that I was with didn't cancel the contract. I made to them multiple requests officially through their channels that they require you to do it. And on top, I was on the phone with them. I said, how much money is this going to cost me? What are we going to have to do here? I wanted to take care of things properly. I didn't want to have any questions about this. After speaking to multiple people, multiple times, and multiple this and multiple that, in the end, my contract didn't get canceled until the time that it would have technically finished anyway. So even after I left Italy, I still had a monthly bill from my internet company in Italy, even though the line was not active, I wasn't there, and it couldn't be accessed. So I was paying every month that same internet fee for maybe 8 or 9 months. And then they forgot to cancel one part of the contract because I had internet and a mobile line. They only canceled the internet line, even though I also wanted the phone line canceled as well. So that ended up being a whole big headache that lasted months and months and months and months with a lot of time and money wasted. This again gets back to my earlier point about make sure that you give yourself enough time before your move so that you can plan things out and really make sure things are properly taken care of. But on a related note, moving on to this next topic, has to do with other utilities, like for example, maybe electric. Depending on where you're moving, some countries may have multiple operators who can supply you gas, electric, water, whatever it might be that you need for your apartment. And there could even be options that are competitive with one another. Or maybe, for example, you'll even find multiple different tiers of electrical offers. If you sign for a billing cycle that automatically does a direct debit from your account, maybe you'll save a little extra money. Or maybe you'll have one type of contract that gives you X thousand kilowatt hours per year. And if you go over that, then your electricity either gets cut off or you'll have to take it up to the next tier and pay for more. Or maybe you'll have different rates depending on if you're using electricity at night or during the day or on the weekend or whatever it might be. So those are all things to keep in mind. In countries where you do find this, you might find a website where you can actually compare and contrast between the different companies, or you can go in person to these offices, get the offers that they have currently, or speak to them on the phone if you speak the local language. But definitely shop around and find out all of these various details, because you can end up wasting a lot of money very quickly by being on the wrong contract. Even, for example, if you're maybe in an older building that doesn't have updated meters, like smart meters, for example, then you might find yourself in a situation like exists in many places in Europe where you might not get, say, your actual rate for the month for your bill. It would be an estimation. And that estimation of what your usage should be could be above what you're actually supposed to pay, or it could be below. There are ways, for example, if you are still on one of the older meters in your building, that you can ask them to come out and do a direct meter reading and give you exactly what your bill should be. But there could be a little bit of a gamble there, because if you've used more electricity, then they can charge you a lot more for that than maybe you were expecting. For example, maybe it could be even that you've had a really cheap bill from January till August, and then in August, someone comes out and checks your meter and they see, oh, wait, hold on, there's this huge difference between what was paid and what should have been paid. So also be careful about your usage. Electricity can be quite expensive in Europe. Just depends on where you are, and it depends on what you're using and how you're using it. But these days, electricity can be expensive everywhere. In a recent episode, I also spoke about having an accountant and getting the right accountant, how to choose the right accountant. But one of the reasons why is because if you don't have the right person who's there on your team, you can end up spending a lot more than you might need to. By having somebody who's willing to look and understand your situation properly, maybe they can help you maximize on your situation and be able to minimize the amount that you'll actually have to pay in taxes in your new country of residence. Or one of the other things that I've had personal experience with is having an accountant who maybe didn't take care of their job when they needed to. For example, I had an accountant in Portugal who did not do the annual submission correctly and on time when this person was supposed to, and that ended up costing my business a very significant amount of money. So making sure that you do have that person there with you, working for you, working on your side is very important. And making sure that you have that good relationship back and forth also is important. That's one of the reasons why I spoke about if you're getting an accountant outside of your country as an expat. I'll put the link up. I think it's this corner. It could be this corner. Up in one of the corners, up in the top of the screen. If you're watching on your phone or your computer, you'll be able to hear some of the things that I go through when trying to select the correct accountant for me, because it can be an area where you could waste a lot of money, not just on taxes or fines, but also even on the services themselves. Some accountants get very expensive when you add the word expat anywhere in relation to it. But of course, when you're moving to a new country, you're going to have those daily necessities, and making sure you understand what's available, where is it available, and how much it's available for will be really important to understand. For example, maybe if you find yourself in a city center that maybe doesn't have a lot of supermarkets in the area and just smaller mini markets or convenience stores, you could end up spending double the price for certain things, maybe vegetables or certain pre-packaged goods than what you might spend on at a normal supermarket. So do make sure that you compare and contrast. And just because you can go to your little corner market doesn't mean that you're going to be supporting a local business because maybe they're getting it from somewhere else and importing and exporting and blah, 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 blah. Maybe you're supporting the local salesperson, but some of their prices, unfortunately, can be much more expensive than what you might be able to find elsewhere. So don't feel bad if you're looking at different places to find out what's the best pricing, and maybe even, for example, you might be able to get groceries delivered to your door. And maybe bringing things back to kind of some of the aspects that have to do with the place that you're living in, your apartment, your home, whatever it might be. If you are going to be renting the place, there are certain countries that do actually have within the culture the norm of being able to negotiate, even if it's only slightly. So it's worthwhile knowing ahead of time, if you're going to a country where this is the normal behavior, that maybe the price is put up significantly higher with the expectation that somebody's going to come in and try to negotiate it down. It's not like that in every country. I mean, for example, Germany is probably one of those countries where you definitely don't want to try negotiating. I'm not saying it's always like that, but I would make that assumption that it's probably not going to be very common there. But there's also going to be another thing. Like I was talking about earlier on in the episode, depending on how you're entering the country, you might have to figure out where you're able to insert yourself into the system. If you need the residency to get the job, to get the apartment, to this, that, and the other. If you're needing an apartment and maybe, for example, you don't have a job in that country, you might have to figure out a way of making it attractive to the landlord to be able to allow you in. Many countries do have a law that says you can only take up to X amount of months as the deposit. But you might find that in some places, even though it might be illegal to do that, that there could be a certain norm that is expected that you're going to pay X amount as a guarantee to be able to get into the apartment because of whatever reason. And you could see in some places, and I've actually seen this personally, where some landlords might ask you for maybe 6 months up front as a deposit or a year up front if you don't have a work contract in that country or some way to be able to guarantee what it is that you're doing and that you're going to be able to keep up with your monthly rent. There are different ways to make that possible and to make that attractive. And maybe even, for example, if you give up certain things in the contract that you say you're going to do, that might be a way of negotiating something in the contract, or maybe even saying that they're not responsible for painting something. That could be a money saving thing for them because it's going to be very normal in many apartments that they're going to paint it before you come in and paint it after you've gone out. So there are different ways to make things more attractive, and you have to just understand what the situation is that you're dealing with. If you're buying a place, of course, then it's a totally different story to begin with. But of course, if you're going to be moving to Europe, banking is going to probably be a very big necessity. And for example, even if you're wanting to pay rent in a lot of places, you'll have to do that through a wire transfer. And you'll have to consider also that not all banks are free and that you may have to apply for an account, not just go and open up an account. And depending on where you're going to be opening up an account, you might have to go for multiple visits before your account is actually finished opening. And also, it's very common that you'll find that there's going to be a fee for the usage of the account. I've seen, depending on where you are in the EU, anywhere from, say, maybe €3 all the way up to €20 per month to keep the account open. There are places where you can have free accounts, of course, or for example, Italy has kind of an interesting alternative option. It's not a proper banking account. You can find from different banks or even from the post office these prepaid debit cards that also have a bank account number attached to it. So for example, if somebody is sending you money, like for example, if you need to receive your monthly wages, that you could give them this IBAN number and functionally it will be the same for you to be able to receive your money. Or if you need to make a payment to somebody, then you could potentially do it through one of these cards. It depends on the card and how it's all done. Keep in mind, there are different ways to be able to save money. And then even if you're needing to convert money from one currency to another, I mean, for example, I've spoken about them many times and they're not a sponsor, but Wise can often have some really interesting rates when it comes to being able to get money from dollars to euros, euros to dollars, euros to pounds, pounds, whatever it might be. Revolut, I haven't compared Wise and Revolut in a long time, but I remember back when I was comparing them that the rates and the fees with Wise were a little bit better. That could have changed. I know a lot of people, especially a lot of young people, seem to like Revolut, but you're just going to have to do the research and find out what's right for you in the end, because also keep in mind, the wire transfers are going to have a cost, or if you're needing to pull the money in via a debit card or a credit card, or even another wire transfer to get it in, there could be fees associated with them and they might not be all that small. Anyway, thank you all for joining me for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. I'm going to round things out here. Of course, thank you to those of you who help to make these episodes possible on a monthly basis through RafaelDiFuria.com/Patreon, patreon.com/RafaelDiFuria, as well as the super thanks button here on YouTube. Those do really help this project to be able to continue. And of course, a huge thank you to those of you who participate in the comment section and share your thoughts there. If, of course, you have any money saving tips, feel free to leave them down here on YouTube, as well as a big thank you to those of you who like these episodes and share them with your friends. All of these things are very greatly appreciated. And of course, again, I'm Rafael Di Furia. This has been another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter, and I will see you all next time.